Cuando se creó la Universidad Francisco Marroquín, nunca fue concebida como una institución educativa en sí, sino como un ideal, como una causa y como un poderoso agente de transformación. Esta es la diferencia entre la UFM y cualquier otra. La academia es el vehículo, claro, pero no el destino de lo que hacemos. Desde su primer día de vida hasta este preciso momento, la Universidad Francisco Marroquín ha existido para encontrar y nutrir mentes brillantes y para plantar en ellas la urgencia de preguntar, argumentar, transformar y elevar la realidad que les rodea. Nos urge la obligación de cuestionar los dogmas, sean del tipo que fueren. Nos rebelamos contra las tradiciones. Vivimos para crear nuestro propio destino, no para seguir mecánicamente reglas impuestas por otros. Existimos para forjar nuestros propios pensamientos, no para creer a ciegas en los hallazgos de terceros, por sublimes que parezcan. Creemos en el individuo, único con capacidad de pensar, razonar y actuar. ¿Por qué? ¿Cómo? ¿Qué pasaría si? Este es el inicio más frecuente de las conversaciones en nuestras aulas. Creemos que no hay herramienta más poderosa que las preguntas, ni fuerza capaz de doblegar las ideas. Por eso no nos interesan las respuestas prefabricadas. Para nosotros, no hay verdades absolutas. Creemos en la libertad como en nuestra brújula y en la responsabilidad como en nuestro norte. Nos inspiran los ideales y acciones de pensadores, maestros y fundadores, individuos que han transformado la historia. Nos consume buscar, encontrar y acompañar a jóvenes mentes en su búsqueda personal y dotarlas de las herramientas para que al cambiar su destino, alteren la historia y empujen adelante a su comunidad, a su país y a su planeta. Estas no son simples palabras. Llevamos 50 años actuando. ¿Tienes alguna pregunta?
Look around you. So much of our modern world is new. New ideas, new buildings, new narratives. And that's great. Change is necessary for progress. The whole world gets it. So how is it possible that despite all this progress, we still learn in the exact same way our grandparents did? Our education is evolving so slowly. But why? What if your education could evolve and improve as quickly as the world around us does? What if your education was designed to help you discover who you really are? If students were created like co-creators instead of just products? If there was a space meant to build connections between teachers and students? A place where safe space doesn't mean you'll be shielded by censorship. Where liberty isn't just what you learn, but how. Your education should keep up with the rest of the world. And now, it can.
Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have you here. We're especially extra mega excited about this topic, which is very dear to all of our hearts, I'm sure, education in a free society. And as many of you know, UFM's mission is to teach and disseminate the ethical, legal, and economic principles of a society of free and responsible people. And when we think about freedom, we often talk about politics, philosophy, law, rule of law, and economics. And of course, our mission includes the content, which is what we study here, but it also includes the teaching part, or as I like to call it, the learning part. And we rarely consider how we learn and what we can do to learn better the principles of a free society. Barbara Oakley, who got the honorary degree a week ago, at graduation was sharing and also in her talks, that there are two things that we don't really study at school. One of them is finance, and the other one is learning how to learn. So we all talk about, and we all see it in almost every school's mission, that we want to learn how to learn, but we rarely talk about how we learn and how we could do that better, which is what we do here at UFM and at any educational institution. So today is a very special day and a very special lunch and opportunity where we can talk about how do we learn, internalize, and practice the principles of freedom. And we're honored with 5 amazing speakers and visitors who have thought deeply about this, who have written, talked, and developed classes, learning experiences, and projects around questions such as how do we make our methodology in the classroom consonant with our goals for a free society? So let's take this as an opportunity to zoom out and to think about our big goal of helping students become independent thinkers. How do we become critical thinkers? And it's not just by people telling us, become a critical thinker. We wish that it was like that, but we know that it doesn't work like that. So thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to learn more about these questions and these ideas and to dive deeply into how do we educate for freedom. And I also want to thank the School of Gastronomy for putting together the lunch today. So the students were the one making the lunch. So thank you. Where's Jimena? Jimena is right there. Thank you for the students for this awesome lunch. And also thank you to Shady and Gabi, who are always backstage and making things happen. And especially now they're backstage because I can see Gabi. I don't know where Shady is, somewhere backstage. But thank you too. And thank you to the anfitriones for being always the best hosts, and New Media and Mantenimiento. And thank you to all of you. And let's start with our speakers. The first speaker is Marcia Familaro Enright. So Marcia started an organization called the Reason, Freedom, and Individualism Institute. And part of that organization includes organizing a summer program called Great Connections in the Chicago area, where students have 1 week of seminars where they talk about ideas and also visit cool museums and cool places. And when I was a student, I went to all of her summer seminars for my 4 years of college. So I really enjoyed doing that. And she's now working on creating a college in the US called Reliance College. And she also started a Montessori school when her kids were little for her kids, and it's still existing. And it's a great school. So welcome, Marcia, and welcome everyone.
We're not sitting up here now. So I wanted to address the idea of the learning experience. That was one of our questions. And it made me think about something I read in Alexis de Tocqueville many years ago. I don't know if everybody knows who he is. He was a French aristocrat who visited the US in 1831. He supposedly to study American prison systems, but instead he ended up collecting and analyzing all kinds of experiences of what the US was like and how it was different from Europe. And his book, Democracy in America, is still very influential today. So I found a quote in it that I thought was very relevant to this topic. And he says, "It is easy to perceive that almost all the inhabitants of the US use their minds in the same manner." Now remember, this is when the US was probably the most free, about this time, 1830s. "To evade the bondage of system and habit, of family maxims, class opinions, and in some degree of national prejudices, to accept tradition only as a means of information, and existing facts only as a lesson to be used in doing otherwise and doing better. To seek the reason of things for oneself and in oneself alone, to tend to the results without being bound by means, and to strike through the form to the substance, what I call the philosophical method of the Americans. Each American appeals only to the individual effort of his own understanding." So I look at that and I think, well, this in a sense is a model of what we'd like to see with all of our students, and to see so that they could actually exist and flourish in a free society. How do we get there? I think we have to think a lot about the psychology of the learner and the developmental needs of the person at the age that we're teaching them. What are the developmental needs of a person just coming into college? They're trying to find their place in the world, right? And they're trying to figure out how to interact well with other people. And they're trying to find out how can they reason well about things, and what should their opinions be? What should their values? How should they decide to live the rest of their life? How do we help them in that and really encourage them to develop into free persons? I think in that respect, the teacher has to be a guide and a curator of the best materials for students. I think that's our most powerful role. I think that we have to use methods that are carefully crafted to encourage their strong reasoning. And in this respect, this is why I'm one of a big advocates of Socratic dialogues, but very well-run, very specially crafted Socratic dialogues, in which the students can test their opinions against the facts and the evidence. They have to constantly be referring to the facts and the evidence. They reason with the other students, and in that respect, it expands their powers of reasoning because they see how somebody else reasons about the same piece of information. And also, I think, to encourage them to always connect the abstract ideas they're learning in their classroom or from their readings to the real world. If you use these ideas, what happens in life with these ideas? I think all of that can really encourage the student to develop these habits of mind that will make them successful in actually navigating the world and finding their place in it. I think we need to teach them logical fallacies. I think that's one of the primary ways in which they can identify when they're not reasoning well and when other people aren't reasoning well. I think in dialogue, you also learn how to communicate effectively with other people. So you're not debating with them, but you're actually interacting and reasoning well with them. And you're coming to a mutual understanding so that you all have a better truth in terms of whatever you're looking at. And I think this connecting ideas to real life is very important. I remember when I was taking integral calculus, and I slogged through the whole class, learning how to do the algorithms, learning the concepts, until the last class when the teacher told us how to use integral calculus. And he gave an example of how you can use it to determine the size of a driveway, for example. And the whole world dawned open to me on this. And I thought, why the heck didn't he tell us this at the beginning? And then I would really understand what the calculus was about. I spent many years asking mathematicians, why do we study quadratic equations? And it took me years before somebody gave me a decent answer, where they said, well, it's because it explains so many situations in the world where you have a range of answers. I'm like, oh, okay, now that makes me interested in it. Because that's also something very important, is to catch the motivation of the students. And how do you do that? You have to find, how can you show them that what you're learning here in this classroom is relevant to you, the student's life, and to your interests and your long-term needs. I think also we need to make sure that we have the students as the driver of the activities. We've had a long tradition of the professor being up there, feeding the answers to the student giving them back. Do they really incorporate the material when they do that? How much time do I have? 5 minutes, okay. I don't know how many of you have seen this study that MIT did, the Annenberg Foundation did at MIT. I was talking about this morning. It's astounding. It's a study where they went and asked MIT graduates at their graduation to explain why do we have the seasons? What is the scientific theory of that? Nobody came up with the right answer. They all had an individual understanding of the seasons, and it wasn't the scientific answer. And why does that happen? Oh, they also talked to some people in middle school, and the teacher was sure that the students understood, especially the one student, understood the theory of the seasons. But when they went and talked to the student had a private idea of why we have the seasons. So what is the problem with this? Because the teachers think that just because they're telling you the answers and you're giving the answer back on the test, that means the student understood it. But in dialogue with the student, and when the student has to actually be active in making a project or materials, they reveal what they understand and what they don't understand, and you have a much better way of making sure that they actually understand scientific or whatever factual material that you want to get at them. The last thing I want to bring up is something that I think we need to think about when it comes to the psychology of the student, the fact that we're highly social creatures. Now, we would like to see in a free society people being very independent and and using their own minds to come to conclusions and being able to stand up to the crowd, right, when they disagree with somebody. I mean, we certainly have that problem today, at least in the US. I don't know about what's going on here, but it's frightful what's going on in the US. So we want people who will be able to have that confidence to stand up to the crowd. And how do we do that? Well, on top of teaching them excellent reasoning and them having the knowledge that they need to be able to well argue with somebody, and having the skills to have a dialogue with somebody who they disagree with in a productive way, they also can really benefit by having the sense of a supportive social environment, right? This is one of the great things about UFM, is that you feel very supported in your views when you're here. You're in the same culture. What about when you're on your own? Well, this is where I think it's very important to expose students to heroes, people who have done important things and stood up to the crowd, and great art that illustrates this too. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Bridge of Spies. It's about, okay, so it's a lawyer who ends up defending a communist spy, and then having to go by himself to East Germany. This is during the Cold War, in order to get an American spy who was Gary Powers to come to negotiate for that. But anyway, it's an amazing it's an amazing film about heroism and just this independence of this fellow. And I think that that kind of thing, or great art, you know, a great story, say about I forgot my list here. Say, many of you know about Howard Rourke, for example, in The Fountainhead, who stands up to different ideas. Having that in your mind, it's like having your own society with you, and it helps your confidence. And so I think it's very important for students to be exposed to that kind of thing too. Okay, those are my suggestions, and I look forward to the other speakers' understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. And you all have a paper on your table, and it has the schedule for today, and it includes, and I guess it's also on the screens. If you want to ask questions to the speakers, you can do that through Slido, and that's spelled SLI.do, and the code is 2021-12-11. So if you can type that, then you can ask questions to the panelists, and we'll have that questions at the end. So right now, I'm inviting Robert Schiemens to the stage, and he's the director of the Center for Independent Thought and also for Stossel in the Classroom. If you've seen those videos, amazing videos of John Stossel in the Classroom, Rob has been taking that to high schools for many years now, high schools and beyond, because I actually learned about that when I was in college. And welcome, Rob, and thank you so much for being here. Oh, wait, I have another ad. There's a great video on New Media, an interview that Will Ogilvy did to Rob on critical thinking, and I highly recommend it. So thank you, Rob.
I have to leave the country to be popular. Thank you. Thank you, Carmen, and good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here on such a beautiful day in Guatemala. It sure beats the freezing cold of New Hampshire and the dreariness of New York. So thanks to Carmen and Lissa and Gabrielle and Pablo and Isa and Marinés and Will and all the other wonderful people at UFM who make this my favorite university. And not just because they spent days looking for my lost luggage a few years ago. The people here are welcoming at a wonderful educational establishment that presents to its students opportunities that most places do not. The Michael Polani College here at UFM is perhaps the best example of providing students opportunities to learn and to succeed. My name is Rob Shemens. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences. I am not an educational expert. I'm a teacher, an educator, a facilitator of learning. As a young man, I did not want to be a teacher. It never crossed my mind. I worked for 11 years in a defense industry making missile systems. What a change that was, huh? But I was a youth baseball coach, and I helped children become better skilled and learn the basics of baseball. And that was a fulfilling volunteer work. The students wanted to get better. The baseball players wanted to get better. They wanted to learn. And most of all, they wanted to have fun. So when I got bored with what I did, I went back to college to get another master's degree and decided to get a degree in education, just in case. There was no teacher from my childhood whom I wanted to emulate. There was no role model. So many teachers say, I wanted to be just like this teacher. I did not. Most of my teachers were boring and passionless. Just like that. I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a teacher, and I didn't know what kind of teacher I wanted to be. I just knew what kind of teacher I didn't want to be. I took to heart the idea of teacher as coach, there to cheer on our students, to guide them, to provide opportunities for them to succeed, and to support them when they failed. It turned out students were just like baseball players, just in a different setting. They wanted to get better and learn and have fun. And we needed to relate what was going on in the classroom to them like we did on the baseball field. So 4 years after getting my teaching license, I quit my job, took a huge pay cut, and became a teacher in a New York City public high school. I joked around that I was in enemy territory. As I said, I was a teacher, not an educational expert. It seems to me that in the United States, we have more educational experts than teachers. We were constantly bombarded with workshops that told us the best way to teach, presented with data on best practices, each of which contradicted each other. There was one right way, and each was sure she or he knew what it was. Unlike most of my colleagues, I tuned them out quickly. The school system, the administrators, were so sure they were right, they forced the latest teaching methods onto every teacher in the system. There were no options, but there is not one right way. Just Google learning styles. There are 3 or 4 or 7 or 8. We can't even figure out how many learning styles there are, and they're going to tell us there's one right way to teach. So teachers with 150 students a day were told they had to adapt their lessons to each of the 3, 4, 7, or 8 learning styles. They did it. The system did it. It figured out how to take young, enthusiastic teachers and zap the life right out of them. Wouldn't it be better if teachers wouldn't it be better if administrators encouraged teachers to reflect on their successes and failures in the classroom? To focus on the success and failures of their own students? My early days attending talks about liberty and free enterprise influenced my teaching. I'd have my students research topics independently, challenge what we take for granted, consider intentions, but think about the results, and to look at the unintended consequences. My students had never been presented with such ideas. The teachers taught from textbooks, those irksome, bulky objects of knowledge I hated carrying from class to class when I was a student. They learned facts, many of which were simply narrative, one side of a story. I'd hear questions such as, why haven't we heard this before? Or better, Mr. Davidson teaches us facts, not opinions. That wasn't true at all. But he only showed one side, so it had to be a fact. The students wanted to know why school was the way it was. My first year teaching, I watched the school newspaper, a 4-page uninspiring collection of articles about adults cover the hallway within minutes of its distribution. It was awful, nothing of interest for students. It was not in a student-focused school. The next year, I took over the school newspaper, and in a school with not even a gym, we put out 32-page newspapers, 7 pages covering our sports. Also that year, I volunteered to help the school's baseball coach. And turned out at the end of the year, he quit, moved to Arizona. The principal said, oh, the baseball team's available, and I know you were helping him, so you should apply. I was a Little League coach. I couldn't teach you how to throw a curveball. And I said that to him, and he made it clear he wasn't asking me. He was telling me. So I did, and I realized this could be a disaster. I don't mind embarrassing myself. I might be doing a little bit of that now. But I thought, if I thought about teacher as coach, why don't I think about coach as coach? It worked. I didn't have to know how to throw a curveball. I just had to have one player on my team who did. He could teach. They could teach each other. They helped each other out. The players I worked with best became captains. They led the team on and off the field. The other coaches told me I was crazy. They were very controlling. But we turned it into a team that went in 21 years to 14 playoffs, won 5 divisions, went to 2 city championships and won 1, and that was with a Little League coach who couldn't teach you how to throw a curveball. How do we foster choice and promote independent critical thinkers in the classroom? How do we prepare students for collaborative, creative culture in a free society? We give them opportunities to practice that in a safe, encouraging way. One of my students was sitting in our writing center, and he looked like he was copying something. And I said to him, what are you doing? And he said, I'm revising the homework. You wrote all these suggestions on it. Why wouldn't I do that? Well, up until that moment, I never thought, other than in my journalism class, I never thought, what a great idea. Students should be revising. I learned from him. And that's what it is. It's a learning experience for all of us. Yoda taught me, I taught him. We are all works in progress. Teachers love to preach about the real world, how tough it is, how unforgiving. But classrooms are the toughest and most unforgiving places for students, especially if they didn't do as they were told. We've all heard the term, practice what you preach. It's sound advice. If we want students to think for themselves, to weigh out their options, to look beyond intentions and at results and unintended consequences, if we want them to walk out of school able to work collaboratively and to create, then we need to lead by example, to cheer on our students, to give them opportunities to succeed and to fail and to reflect. If we want our students to become independent thinkers who understand the importance of freedom, we have to equip them with the skills to do that by allowing them to practice freedom in our own classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I want to be coached by Rob. And now I invite Stephanie Bolaños. Stephanie went to UFM and she now teaches here. And I always say that we always at Formación Continua, we love her and we're always, always have great things to say about her. And she's a teacher at the economics department and at the CoLab, which is an awesome new project of UFM where students from different departments collaborate to solve challenges. And Isa and Jorge Gabriel and Robert are all very involved in that project. So thank you for doing that important work. And Steffi also works for Maven, which is an online cohort-based course program. And she created this curriculum for el curso Instituto de Diseño de Cursos en Línea for Formación Continua. And she also is a learning experience designer and works at P1440, which is a volleyball organization for girls, for high schoolers. So welcome, Steffi.
Thank you, Carmen. Excited to be here. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about learning to fly in a kid's toy. So this is how it goes. In 1934, the Air Corps, which is the military's most skilled, ready to combat men were dying in plane crashes. And this wasn't because of a war. It actually was because they were just trying to deliver the US mail through like these very stormy, incredibly harsh weather conditions. So back then, the common knowledge about what makes a good pilot is, well, whether you're born a good pilot or you're not. And how it worked is that you would get in a plane with a trained pilot, go up all the way to the sky. The pilot will do a lot of turns and loops and crazy things. And if you didn't get sick, well, that was it. You were qualified to be a good pilot. As you might guess, that wasn't very effective. In 1934, there were around, I think it was 66 plane crashes and forced landings and 12 dead pilots. It was a mess. And so enter Edwin Albert Link. Edwin was a lover of flying. He was passionate about flying, but taking classes was too expensive and also very ineffective, as I told you before. When he turned 16, he finally managed to pay one flying lesson. It cost him $50 at the time, which was a lot of money. And it was basically what I just told you. He got in a plane with an expert pilot. They turned around, did a lot of crazy loops. He came back down. He was not sick, so that was lucky. But he was disappointed. He wanted to learn how to fly, and he couldn't even put his hands on the controls at any moment. What kind of learning was that? So anyway, this person was the son of a piano and organ maker from New York. So he came back to the factory, borrowed a few pumps, and basically created a device that worked just the same as an airplane. It literally had like a small tail, an instruments panel. It even had a red light on the nose that will indicate if the pilot was making any mistake. So anyway, it worked just as a plane. It was the size of a bathtub shower. That was the only difference. And then he went back to the military. And one important thing. His marketing for this device he created was amazing. He basically said, I can teach you how to fly regular flying or instruments flying with just in half the time for a fraction of the cost. So it was very attractive. And what do you think was the reaction? What do you think people said when this device came out? He failed miserably. They laughed at his device. I think he ended up selling like 50 units to penny arcades and amusement parks, basically. So it ended up being just a kid's toy, because after all, how can you learn how to fly in a kid's toy, right? Anyway, then the mail fiasco happened, and the officers were starting to get really worried about people dying delivering the US mail. So in one of the very few first recorded instances of nerd power basically overpowering military tradition, they decided to take in his simulator and see how that worked. And so they take the simulator, and I'm going to pause here for a second to kind of like just to think a bit about what does a good simulator has in common with a good or a great learning experience. Any ideas? It's fun. What else? Relevant, safe, hands-on. Yeah, correct. And here's an interesting question. Why are simulators, which are taxing, can be a lot of hard work, and can even be frustrating, different from, why are they fun? What makes them different from a class, for example? It feels like real life. Thank you, Isa. It has some components that might be interesting to cover. First, simulators, just like good games, are winnable. You're able to win this thing on the first place. So I read sometime that 4 out of 5 gamers do not complete their missions, do not solve the puzzles, do not move to the next stage, get stalked, burn and die, and still they're having fun. So what is it? What is it with gamers? Do they enjoy failure? And the thing is, yes, they kind of enjoy failure. If you have a well-designed game, failure only motivates you to be better. You want to figure out new ways to do things better. You're getting feedback quickly, so you want to kind of like figure out how to move on to the next stage and become a better player. So they have to be winnable. That's the first characteristic. The second one is there has to be a novel challenge. So our brain loves novelty. Dan Ariely, which is a behavioral economist, once made an experiment of a company in the 1940s who basically launched a mix for making cake. And you didn't have to do anything. The mix was already there just to prepare the cake. And the sales were terrible. And then he found out that making a cake is really about, it's a labor of love. You have to do the cake, spend some time working on it. So they changed the recipe. Now you have to add 2 eggs to the recipe. Everything was already there, but you had to add 2 eggs. Sales rise to a ceiling. Like, people loved that mini challenge. And that's the whole point of simulators. It doesn't have to be easy. The whole point is that they're hard, because that's when you really learn. So that's the second characteristic. The third one is goals. When you're in a simulator, the goal is very clear. You're clear about what you need to do. You're clear about where you're standing. You're clear about what you need to accomplish. Then there's also repetition. You can improve, and students in general, they can improve as much as they practice. So it's key to give them time to practice, just as in a simulator. And then also feedback, which was mentioned here before. On a simulator, if you're doing something right, you might get points or more skills. And if you're doing something wrong, you might be disqualified or penalized in a way. Either way, you get feedback fast. So this helps with your learning process. So then again, why do simulators work? Simulators work because they put learners at the center. They're basically the ones making the decisions. They're the ones making decisions that will have consequences. Students are the ones acting. That's why simulators work. And this action makes a difference. So that's the key part. If they will be more vested on the simulator if they see how that relates to their real life and the things they're familiar with. And the best thing about simulators is that they allow you to crash without the painful experiences you usually live in your classroom, embarrassment or low grades, or even worse yet, not learning at all. We educate for freedom by giving students freedom to choose, freedom to have them be the ones who make the choices, even them who build their own simulators. Why not? So how to build your own, and how much time do I have left? Thank you. Simulators are great practice machines, but you need all these components I just mentioned in order for them to work. For example, if you have a very motivated student that's going all into a Socratic dialogue, for example, but he's not getting feedback, how would he know how can he improve? Both components are needed. And on the other hand, what if he's getting a lot of feedback, but he doesn't have a lot of opportunity to do it all over again, repeat and learn? So you need kind of like all the pieces to make this work. What ended up happening with Link and his simulators? Well, wartime came and he ended up building more than 10,000 simulators. That's like one every 45 minutes, which is crazy. This means that I think it was more than half a million officers ended up logging in millions of flight hours. Then he moved on and created more simulators for jets, and eventually even built a module for the Apollo mission to the moon. The question is, how can we build in simulators into our learning experiences? How can we create experiences into which students feel that they have ownership, they can win the game, they can learn from it, they can get quick feedback, and better yet, they can learn with and from others? Excited to hear your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Steffi. And now I'd like to welcome, and please don't forget to post your questions on Slido. You can also upvote other people's questions. And now I'm going to invite Martin Cox from the John Locke Institute. And we were grateful to have him here yesterday too, giving a workshop that Ronald put together, and Pablo and other people, and Isa, other people at UFM. But we were talking about education, first thinking about the purpose of education, and then thinking about facilitators, methodology, and curriculum for learning. So the John Locke Institute organizes a gap year program, summer seminars, essay contests, and things to help students become independent thinkers and to become free people and to get out of their comfort zones and learn more and learn better. So welcome, Martin. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm happy to be here. I love this university. It's such an exciting place to be. I was talking to one of the students here, a young undergraduate, and I said, there seem to be a lot of libertarians in this university. She said, yeah, there's a lot of libertarians. If they're not libertarian when they arrive, they're libertarian by the time they leave. And I said, but this libertarianism thing, I mean, if you had your way at UFM, then the poor would just be left to die in the gutter, wouldn't they, with libertarianism? She said, no, you don't understand. At UFM, if we had our way, the gutters would be privatized. Now, of course, we know that free markets are a fantastic solution to many of the problems that we face as human beings. And one of the things that excites me about the John Locke Institute and what we're able to do there is that we can help people to see this. Henry Kissinger said that when people arrive in Washington, D.C., they come with their entire lifetime stock of intellectual capital fully formed. In other words, they don't learn anymore after they get there. And I think that by the time university students arrive as freshmen at first-year undergraduate level, they come with their entire stock of ideological capital fully invested in long-term investments. And we know that it's kind of costly to change your mind about stuff, right? Because it's socially costly. If all of your friends are the people who care about saving the whales, and then you start to wonder whether we should actually save them, then you're going to lose your friends, and you might have to try and find new friends. And that's a costly thing. So one of the things that we try to do at the John Locke Institute is we try to get the students early, before they're kind of ossified, before they have kind of settled on who they are and what they believe. And of course, we'd love to persuade them that free markets are good. We'd love to persuade them of the value of autonomy, why freedom matters. But actually what we have to do, first of all, is we need to persuade them to listen to arguments that sound wrong. So I'm going to tell you three things. I'm going to tell you about what we do at the John Locke Institute in terms of our target audience, so who we're trying to reach. By the way, it's not who you know if you're a grammarian, it's whom you know. So whom we're trying to reach, I beg your pardon. And second of all, I want to talk about what we do in order to reach the students. And the third thing is I want to talk about the means by which we do it, sort of how we do it. So first of all, so our target is we go for young students. We want to get students when they're 15 or 16. Recently, we've been going for even younger students. We had a student on the summer school this year who's 11. That seems pretty young, but actually his vision of the good life, the free society was transformed in 10 days with us, this young 11-year-old. And he's super excited to come back next year, which is great. We also tend to focus on students that we think are going to be influencers. So we have, I think we had 240 students last summer. But of course, if we can get those students to replicate our message, if we can get them out there doing our job and teaching their peers or representing good critical thinking and good ideas to their peers, then I think that can amplify and multiply the good work that we're capable of doing. So we're looking for future influencers. That means we're looking for students who are intelligent, students who are ambitious, students who have good social skills often. And we're also probably disproportionately attracting students from rich families. Why is that? Well, partly because our model is a bit unusual in that we actually expect people to pay for the education we give them. That is not what happens in the state sector. It's not what happens in the libertarian movement, actually, for the most part. Normally, we go and give free places away to people and finance it by going to donors. We don't really do so much of that at the John Locke Institute. So we tend to get students from families who can afford to pay for it, but we're developing scholarship programs to expand it to others. But because we're deliberately trying to influence people in the future, we're looking for bringing students in who are going to have the privileges of being influencers. Okay, well, what do we teach them? Well, we'd love to get them excited about free markets, as I said, but we find that the longer I've been doing this, and I've been running these summer schools and gap year programs for a little over 10 years now, and I've come to care more about critical thinking and open-mindedness and intellectual flexibility and intellectual humility more than I care about, whether our students leave us, believing that Murray Rothbard was God incarnate or something like that. So I think the libertarian stuff that we teach is less important than good thinking. And so if I can win one argument with the students, I want them to be open-minded. I want them to be willing to do what we call listen generously. I want them to be open-minded and ready to pay attention to people with whom they're inclined to disagree, expecting to find truth in unusual places, expecting to be surprised. And of course, that's valuable in itself, but it's also a precursor, I find these days, to get people to be willing to listen to somebody who's got a message that, that the free market might have a solution to offer to some of our most important problems. So before you can present our students with the message of the virtues of the free markets and the human dignity that is attendant on respecting the autonomy of individuals, before you can get them to listen to that, you need to teach them how to listen. And that's something that we really emphasize. How do we do that? Well, I want to just, in the remaining couple of minutes, I want to tell you that we do that in two ways. One of them is by the teachers that we bring in, and the other one is by the kind of pedagogical style that we use. And the two things are quite connected because we tend to bring in teachers that have their own pedagogical style. And we like to give a lot of freedom to our teachers rather than being too prescriptive, this is the way we do it here. We're a little bit like that because we think we are kind of groping towards something that really works. But we also respect that if we get great teachers, they'll have their own style, and we like to bring in the best of what they can offer. So who teaches for us? Well, actually, we have a very good fortune of bringing in the best teachers in the world. And I think that's exciting for our elite, brilliant students. They recognize that they're in a place of great privilege listening to really extraordinary teachers. And when I ask people to teach for me, I used to be a little bit more modest. Now I just go to the top person in the world that I wish would say yes, and a whole bunch of them say, yeah, I'd love to. One of them actually was kind of enthusiastic and sought me out. So I'll tell you, first of all, in this room is one of our favorite teachers, Brian Kaplan, you're about to hear from. He's taught for us a number of times in our summer schools in France and in Oxford, but also in Washington, D.C. And Brian's friend Robin, who I think is now in Guatemala, he said, listen, I've heard from Brian that the students at your summer schools are really interesting to teach. I'd love to come. Can I come? And I said, yeah. So now not only am I bold enough to ask the best and brightest of all the teachers in the world, but some of them are coming to me. Nick Gillespie from Reason Magazine came up to me, and I've heard about the John Locke Institute. Can I teach there? And I thought, yeah, you can. This is going to be great. So we get great teachers, but what do I mean by that? They're great teachers because they know their stuff, of course, but that's kind of the least interesting thing about them. They're inspirers, which is more important, but also they're surprisers. So we deliberately bring in teachers who are able to deliver with great conviction something that the students would write off if it was delivered by somebody kind of less dynamic and less interesting. So one of the things that Brian teaches for us is he makes the case for radically open borders, which is something that most of our students think is crazy. And they listen to Brian for a while, and then they think, okay, there might be something in this. And I think actually teaching people the habit of expecting to have their mind changed is terribly important. It's very, very powerful. Because after they leave us, they're looking at every learning opportunity as the possibility that something really magical might be about to happen. So I think we give them that in the short time they're with us. The other thing that we do is the pedagogy I mentioned. I'm going to just finish on this very briefly. We do a couple of things. One of them we've actually borrowed from Brian. He talks about a thing called the ideological Turing test. Some of you have heard of this. We've started to do this on our courses now. And what we do is we invite students to explain someone else's idea, not to fake it. They're not sort of pretending that they believe the opposite. They can do that if they want, but if they can explain what someone else thinks, that's quite an important learning opportunity. But before they explain it, we get them to interview each other to try and learn what the other person thinks. And I think actually when people are talking to someone they disagree with, but who's actually a teammate for them in a game, they're not the enemy anymore. They're not somebody they hate. They're not somebody they want to silence. They actually want to learn what the other person thinks. And that's terribly important. And then last thing of all, we do small group work where we encourage the students to disagree with the professors. And I think that I won't elaborate on this now, but that is also very important, that we encourage disagreement. And we think if we do disagreement fruitfully, respectfully, it can be a tremendously important part of the learning process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And now I'm going to welcome Brian Kaplan, who you briefly heard about, but Brian Kaplan is a teacher, a professor at George Mason University, and he's a New York Times bestselling author. He has books like Open Borders, which has awesome cartoons where he's one of the characters and his family members are the other characters. His twins visited too, and they speak perfect Spanish. So it was fun to see them in the cartoons. He also wrote The Myth of the Rational Voter, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, and The Case Against Education. And he also speaks Spanish and likes to use the word estampa, which I'm sure he might, well, I'm not sure. He might talk about that. But welcome, Brian.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm going to start by making you sad, and then I'm going to try to make you less sad by the end. Why would I make you sad? Well, here's the thing. We're talking about education in a free society, and the problem is overwhelming. It is enormous. If you just think of education as something where we're doing pretty good and then we can improve, well, that's fantasy. Here's the reality is that education works extremely poorly right now. I have something that I call the iron laws of pedagogy. The iron laws of pedagogy, and this is just empirical fact. You can go to educational psychology and see that it's true. First fact, students learn only a tiny fraction of what they are taught. If you have ever taught a class, you know this is true. You tell them a whole bunch of things, and at the end, what do they know? 10% of what you taught them, 5%, 2%. All right, so students learn only a small fraction of what they are taught. Second fact, this is one that is not as obvious, but it can be proven just as easily. Students remember only a small fraction of what they learn. So take that tiny amount that they know at the end of the class, come back and talk to them about it 5 years later and see how much of that they actually still have in their heads. It's really small. It's very depressing. Usually teachers avoid ever finding out about this because the students finish and then you never see them again. And then you don't actually get to observe the forgetting, the great forgetting that occurs almost every time. All right. Then finally, even if students learn it, even if they remember it, there's also a large body of research saying that when they get an opportunity to apply what they have learned in real life, they do not. They do not. You can teach someone the Pythagorean theorem. They know it, they remember it, and yet when in real life they get a chance to go and calculate the squares of two sides in order to get an hypotenuse, they don't use the Pythagorean theorem. They're like, well, we measured the first two sides, now let's measure the third side. That is what we actually see. So if this is the real world, and think about this, we're multiplying three small numbers together. We're multiplying the small share they learn times the small share they remember times the small share they apply. And as you might remember, when you multiply three small numbers together, you get, wait, is that a small number? Big number? Yeah, you get a super small number. All right, so this is what we are facing as educators. It's easy to pretend otherwise, but it's the reality that we're facing. If you want to teach anyone anything, this is the reality that you're facing. Now, now I've made you sad. All right, but the only way that we can improve is by accepting the reality of our dire situation, being courageous and saying, okay, things are bad, and maybe they will never actually be good, but can they be better? Yes, of course they can be better. We can improve. We can definitely improve. All right, so when you go through these, how can we actually improve them? All right, so we've heard some ideas about how to get students to learn a larger fraction of what they're taught. So yes, get more hands-on engagement, be more entertaining, right? These kinds of things do matter. All right. Now, it is depressing when you go and see the world's best teachers and give them an average class of students and see that they still don't succeed that well. In my book, The Case Against Education, I have a passage from Steven Pinker that I quote. Steven Pinker, you've all heard of him, right? One of the great educators on earth. He is as fascinating in person as he is in writing, maybe more so. And guess what? He says maybe half his students at Harvard even bother to attend the class. Attendance is half. Allegedly, the best students in the world get a chance to study with the best teacher in the world, and half don't even bother to show up because they don't care that much. All right. So still, this means even if we are all as good as Pinker, we would still not be doing nearly as well as we hope, but still compare Steven Pinker to the other people at Harvard, and I bet he's doing a lot better. All right, so that's one thing. It's just trying to figure out a way to get more learning. In terms of more retention, also very hard, and it's one where if you aren't paying a lot of attention, you can just forget about the problem yourself, right? But if you really are serious, then you've got to face it. So here there is actual research in educational psychology saying that if you want to improve retention, then you need not only repetition, but you want to go and repeat things with a lag. Right. It is commonly noted that students do a lot of cramming. They just try to learn everything they can right before the test. And guess what? That is the best way to do well on a test. Cramming totally works. If you have 10 hours of time and all you care about is a grade, then just put all 10 hours right before and that will max out your grade. However, the same research also shows that if you want to know the material 10 years later, it is better to spread out the learning. Spend a few hours, put it aside, come back to a few more hours, put it aside, come back, put a few more hours. So that is something that we can do that improves learning as well, right? Improves retention. And then in terms of actually applying what you've learned, hardest thing of all. In educational psychology, they call this transfer of learning. The lesson from about 100 years worth of research is that it hardly ever happens. Hardly ever happens. Started off with research on, does Latin really build mental muscles? And the answer is no, Latin does not build mental muscles. Latin teaches Latin. That's it. All right, maybe improving your Romance languages, although even that is a little questionable, as it turns out. All right, so now, given this situation, what else can we do? All right, so, well, I was getting some inspiration from Martin Cox, actually. So one thing is to realize there is a lot of variation between students. There are many students that are pretty much impossible to inspire. They are fundamentally, totally bored by anything intellectual. Right? And there are teachers that say, we just haven't said it in the right way. I don't think so. I think there's some people that are impossible to persuade. Take my dad. All right. So my dad, I remember from an early age, I was trying to get him excited about ideas. My dad is a very, very smart guy, PhD in electrical engineering, but he says zero intellectual curiosity, right? If it's not about cars or about Jay Leno, then he just doesn't care. And when I was young, I was always thinking, there's got to be some magic formula that I can say, some words I can say that will change my dad's mind. And now I've decided there are no such words. They don't exist. There are no words to change his mind. And honestly, this is true for a lot of people. Now, again, you could just say everything's hopeless and give up, or you can do what Martin Cox does and says, but you didn't say that everyone is like this, did you, Brian? The answer is no, of course not everyone is like this. There are a lot of intellectually curious people in the world. We just have to find them. Right, so that is one of the great missions, as I see it, is just to find all of the curious minds that are currently out on their own and unaware there's anything good happening in the world, and to plug them in. Right, so that's something that Martin Cox did when has done when I am there. It is a thrilling experience, right? And I tell the students, normally I don't get to teach students like you. Right? And you can say that it's, if I had just done a better job, I would get my students inspired. Look, these are students that will not even show up to class. Right? My teacher evaluations are very good, but I'm only good for a professor. I'm only good for a professor. I'm not good compared to watching Friends reruns or anything like that. But Martin Cox makes this extra effort to go and gather the very best students in the world. And this is actually what we are doing with social media when we do blogging, when we do podcasts. We are trying to send out flares into the world and say, hey, there's something better going on than what you know about. The kinds of teachers that are boring you to tears, those are not the only ones that exist. There are other people who care about this stuff. So really this effort to go and find all the talent in the world, to find the people that are curious, the people that really would like to learn about something, And honestly, I have met so many of these people like through my work, not only as a writer, but especially in terms of trying to publicize it on social media. I know social media gets a very bad rap, a lot of people complaining about it, but in the 1980s, I would have had no audience at all. There'd be no way for me to do this. And now, thanks to this, and thanks to putting myself out there, I really have met hundreds and hundreds of students that would never have actually come to me, but I know they're out there on earth, and I've influenced them and improved their lives. And I say that it is them that we really should be focusing our attention, finding people that are curious, finding people that want to learn, and inviting them into our group, inviting them with a great smile. Last point, I am a big fan of the classic Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Libertarians especially often come to me and say, how can we make our arguments better? And I say, our arguments are great. In terms of arguments, we've done better than anyone else on earth. These are fantastic, wonderful arguments. Always in need of improvement because an argument is a thing of beauty. But where are we doing poorly? Our smiles. We need to have better smiles to be friendlier to people. This is what Dale Carnegie teaches us. Before you can persuade someone, you have to become their friend first. Right? And yes, I will say that libertarians really could improve. Not the people here, you guys are great, but those other libertarians who aren't here. These people really need to go and learn how to give a better attitude. But again, don't tell them this either. Instead, teach by example. Try to go and help them to be friendly to other people and be the change you want to see in the world. That's my happy ending. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us a little bit of hope, just a tiny bit. So thank you for everyone who has been asking questions or voting them. I would invite the panelists, if you can join and maybe sit here. And we have a question. The first question is for Rob and Tono, who's here. Raise your hand, Tono. Ask the question. He says that saying that letting students practicing freedom in the classroom sounds way easier than what it really is. So how do you help students embrace freedom, or how have you helped students embrace freedom in the classroom, especially when it can be painful?
Embracing freedom in the classroom, especially when it can be painful. You know what's painful? I think Brian hit on what's painful in the classroom is uninspiring students and uninspiring teachers. Showing students that they can go and investigate and learn things they're interested in. I never found that to be painful. It gave them an opportunity to explore what they wanted to. Obviously, there's confines that with curriculum that they need to look at, but I never really found that painful. The painful part was the uninspired, and Brian's right. You can't inspire everybody, but I think that's pretty much it. It's just what was painful was the uninspiring kids, but I didn't find that there were all that many. They fed off each other as well.
Thank you, Rob. Brian, give us more hope, please.
Yeah, so to me, again, like the first thing is you need to be your student's friend, right? You need to make them feel like you actually are interested in them, that you can talk, that they can talk to you. And I think, for me, a big part of this is showing your students that you are not afraid to say ugly truths, because it makes people trust you. I'm just going to give a small boast, and that is my kids believe every word I say. Do you know why? Because I always tell them the truth. Even from a very early age. Sometimes they'll ask me a question and I'll say, I'll tell you when you're older, but I never give them sugar-coated lies. And that is why they believe me. That is why when mom says, oh, this tastes good, they ignore her and they look at dad and they say, is dad eating it? If dad's eating it, and even if I'm eating it, say, look, I like it, but it's only a 30% chance you'll like it. Right? Now, of course, at the moment, there is a reason why people lie to kids, and that is because it is impulsively easy, or hoping I can get a small temporary benefit. But there's one thing you lose by those lies: trust in the long run. And guess what? You're going to be living with these kids for a long time. So I found that just being very honest with people, being unafraid to say ugly truths is one of the most important ways that gets people to listen to what you have to say, because they realize this person is not just saying things that sound good. This person is actually telling me about the world as they see it. And while that can make people dislike you, it's important just to remember, just don't tell them ugly truths about themselves. The ugly truths always apply to the people outside the room. Inside the room, everyone's great.
Thank you, Brian. And there's a question that is for Steffi, and this is, are simulators useful for theoretical courses? How do we decide what needs a simulator to facilitate learning?
Thank you for the question. I think, yes, okay, theoretical content is mostly a commodity nowadays. Like, you can find most of the things online. You can learn a lot of great things from great teachers in YouTube, from PhDs in Google or whatever. Like, there's a lot of content out there. One of the main challenges for instructors nowadays is to figure out how to repackage that content and make sure it's experiential for students and it's delivered in a way that they can put it into practice in real life. The sooner the better. So short answer is yes. I believe theoretical content can also be taught as a simulator. Even something as a dialogue can be taught as a simulator, and it doesn't have to be like this big range of things. You just have to go in and tell your students, this is a simulator, you're allowed to crash the plane. And that just takes a lot of pressure off their shoulders and of their own learning.
And there's another question about how could we find the most curious minds? How can we build a funnel to find these curious minds? And this is for anyone who wants to take the question. Hello, curious minds. Marcia.
Well, I found that you have to have a very challenging and interesting program. And it has to be tuned to what the students are interested in learning about. I noticed that the students that I got to my program responded a lot to the idea of they were going to develop their self-confidence. So I think casting it certain ways will attract them, and then giving them the kind of intellectual food that they need makes them, supercharges everything. And I wanted to say something about your story about your father. I think of that as there's an intellectual division of labor, right? And on the one hand, we've done a terrible job of the way that we've taught children from the time they're little, so that by the time they get to high school or college, they're just bored out of their minds with the way they're having to learn. So no wonder they are not inspired in the classroom. And you have to practically stand on your head to do that. On the other hand, we have to be aware that there's people come with different interests. And I'm really glad people want to be accountants, because I am utterly bored by that. So I think that's something to respect too.
Just try to make a lot of friends. So I've got a pinned tweet on Twitter just saying, anytime you see me in public, come say hi. Whole world. Making friends has worked out great for me so far. And of course, there's immediately some horrible people saying, but what if one of them goes and kills you? Well, I'm going to take that chance. I'm not going to go and stay hidden. I'm not going to go and say I don't talk to strangers, right? There is a song by the heavy metal band Dio in the 1980s called Don't Talk to Strangers. And I was talking about it with my 12-year-old son and my 9-year-old daughter. And they're saying, well, if you never talk to strangers, you'll never make any friends. Exactly. The whole point of the song is it's making fun of people who say don't take risks because something might go wrong. Something could go right. Usually things do go right. That's how the world is not on fire.
Yeah, well, Brian, I can vouch for that. Brian says to our students at the John Locke Institute that they're all invited to his house for lunch, which is great. And I like spending a lot of time around Brian because I find I always want to be one of the guys in the room when he's giving ugly truths about the guys outside the room. Seriously, my experience of trying to find curious students is to recognize that students are sometimes a lot more curious than they give themselves credit for. So the two main reasons that students give when they apply to one of our courses are these. I want to be with like-minded people, they say, and I want to increase my knowledge of the subject. And we humor them and say, yeah, we'll do all that for you. But then they come to us and we introduce them to different-minded people, because that's the thing that's going to be valuable. They're already with like-minded people. We need to try to bring differences together. So we've made a little kind of saying. We say like-minded people who think differently. Okay. And then the other thing is this business about trying to expand their knowledge. That's the least valuable thing we can do in education. Knowledge is not scarce anymore. It used to be that we were about a knowledge economy, and if you could get knowledge, knowledge is power. Everyone's got knowledge now. So we kind of ignore that, and we say, we're going to teach you we're going to give you some experiences, we're going to teach you some skills, we're going to challenge you, we're going to try to make you think differently, but we're not going to tell you a lot of stuff, because that's cheap. It's free, in fact. And that's how we get curious students.
I told Martin's students a lot of stuff.
Thank you. We have a cheery question and cheery greetings from Javier, all the way from Madrid. So hi, Javier. And hi to everyone who's watching online. So he's asking a general question. What have you seen motivates teachers to want to change from a traditional setting to a more student-centered way of learning? And he's making this comment that he's noticed that making it more student or learning center makes it harder for the teacher. So what do you think motivates teachers to inspire students to learn and to help them learn? We might need time to think about that.
I think Brian's terrifying stats about how little you remember from what you learn in school should be enough of a motivator to do something different in your classroom. And I don't know how common knowledge that is for teachers, but it is common knowledge that students do get bored, they're not engaged, if they're just like absorbing and not doing anything with what they're learning. So I think that'll be my answer. I don't know if...
Yeah. When I was a small kid, I used to talk about the gears on the bicycle, and I said to my mother, when I go up to a harder gear, meaning the gear where you're pressing harder on turning the pedals, she said, that's not the harder gear. The harder gear is the low gear, because you're having to spin around, but the bike's hardly moving at all. And so if you're saying it's harder to teach in a learning-centered way, yeah, it might feel more effortful, but you're actually achieving the outcome you're going for. So if you want the easy way that achieves nothing at all, well then, yeah, you want to spin your pedals. But I think it's rewarding for teachers to do the stuff that works, even if it feels more effortful while you're doing it. The ratio of output to input is superior.
Just a quick story. My second year of teaching, there was a call from the security at the desk that there were a bunch of students that came to visit me. A colleague who was sitting next to me had been there 10 years at the time. She said, no one's ever come to visit me. I was like, do you realize why? She put no effort into what she did. She didn't relate to the students, and they had no reason to ever stop back and see her. So it ties into what Brian said. Just connect with your students.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our 5 speakers. Right now, we're going to go into this, and we have great questions on Slido, but we'll get a chance to keep exploring these questions as we now have this Jeffersonian lunch. If you've heard of a Jeffersonian dinner, it comes from Thomas Jefferson, who would host dinner parties at his house, just like Brian does right here. And people would come and talk about ideas. So today we're going to talk about education in a free society, and we have help from great facilitators. So we have Samantha, if you can raise your hands, Tono, Isabel, and I'm kind of blind, Jorge Gabriel, and Maria Inés. So thank you very much. And if you could join one of the discussions and join one of the tables, and feel free to ask your own questions and have fun talking.